Hello again and welcome back to another video from Svensk Finland's Besta Magic the Gathering podcast. This video is gonna feature all the instances you need to be aware of in the coming pre-release. I hope I'll see you all down at Fantasiapelit Turku if that's your local store. If you're playing somewhere else, then go somewhere else. I'll be down in Fantasiapelit. I hope I see you there. But without further ado, let's get started and have a look at the kind of tricks you'll be facing in coming pre-release. I'll be focusing in this video on the cards that have an impact on combat, and that means that a few instances are left out, and I'll be basically focusing on the ones that you need to be thinking about when you're deciding on whether you're gonna make that attack, make that block or not. Alright, let's get started. Okay, first off we have Artful Maneuver. Now this is a simple pump, +2/+2 on the end of turn. It has Rebound, which is not really going to affect the combat situation that it's being played into very much. Rebound is the Ojutai keyword that you'll see in blue and white. Now usually you'll see an effect like +2/+2 being costing just one white, but the rebound here makes it a little bit more expensive. But basically a decent trick that makes your creature survive combat. The rebound only matters if you're able to stay on the offensive the following turn, say you have flyers or something like this. But sort of like a basic white trick to look out for. There are other cards where the rebound become more important. Here in this case it's a minor upside, but the main reason you'll want to play this is to make sure your creature survives combat, or to put in that last little bit of damage on your flyers. And if you have evasive attacking creatures, the rebound becomes relevant, otherwise not so much. The next thing is a similar thing, same cost. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until the end of turn. Center Soul. And this can be played defensively to save your guy from removal, or to make it unblockable if they have only single color creature, which is more likely now than before. But keep in mind, of course, that morphs can block a creature who has protection from a color. You cannot give protection from colorless. Again, the rebound becomes relevant only if you're able to keep up the offensive the following turn. So if let's say you play defensively on the opponent's turn, you'll have an option of making a creature unblockable, or at least blockable by only one or two creatures the next turn as well. Again, the price goes up from 1 to 2 mana, and the rebound is a marginal upside here, not completely relevant. And the rebound ability, most importantly, won't affect the combat situation that you cast this in. Onwards. Now this is a bit more powerful. Technically this turns into a 5-mana removal spell. It's pretty easy to be able to get out there, take out their largest threat by playing this offensively. The bad thing with Enduring Victory is that it costs 5 mana. It's going to be pretty obvious when you're holding this up on the defense. On the other hand, they're going to have to attack at some point, but they're probably going to very easily be able to bait this out. The good news is that compared to Sandstorm and Killshot, with both were very playable, very good removal spells, is that this one also has Bolster 1. So you get a little bit more out of the deal. The additional 2 mana gives you a permanent boost to one of your guys. But 5 mana is a lot to keep up, either offensively or defensively, but at least you do get the permanent bonus with Bolster. But keep your eyes open for this one if your opponent plays white and passes with 5 mana open. Next is Scale Blessing, which has a similar bolster effect. Technically this says bolster 2 in the sense that whenever you do bolster 1, it says then put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this functions well in a synergistic deck that has a lot of other bolster already in it, and that's something that the Dromoka clan tries to feature. Bolster is a Dromoka, that is to say white-green ability. This is not as flexible as you might want if you have a complicated combat situation. This will only boost the creature with the smallest toughness, making it also a little bit easier for the opponent to play around. The opponent will be able to know where this will show up. But if you're able to have a dedicated token deck, if you happen to open up a lot of good cards in Dromoka and have a lot of tokens creatures, then this gets quite a bit better. But that takes a lot of setup. The setup cost for that, which is to say, like how much you have to play, like how many cards, how much time you have to spend making this card good, is quite high. So you need to have a lot of things going for you for this to be very, very good. Otherwise, it's simply a +2/+2 for 4 mana, which is alright. It's decent because it's a permanent boost, especially on flyers. So that was all about the white common and uncommon tricks. There's only 4 of them: 2 on 2, 1 on 5, and 1 on 4. They were just decent. White is pretty strong in other respects, it has pacifism and things, but as far as tricks go, they're quite mediocre. quite regular, nothing too special to mention about those. Let's move on to blue tricks, and they don't have, if we don't count counterspells at this point, then they don't have very many and they're not all that great. But Dance of the Skywise is the better trick. Costing 2, it makes your guy a 4/4 with flying. So you'll be able to block small dragons even. You'll be able to have an evasive attacker and win a lot of combats. Now, it does also say it loses all abilities. But the release notes aren't out yet, but if it functions with prowess, like I think it does, if you cast this on a creature with prowess, the prowess will trigger first, will trigger and resolve, creating a +1/+1 effect. And this +1/+1 effect will stay in effect, although the creature then subsequently loses prowess. So let's say you cast this on a 2/3 with prowess. Prowess trigger resolves makes it a 3/4. Then this sets it as power toughness, base power and toughness 4/4. But the +1/+1 effect is still in effect, making your guy a 5/5 flying. So keep that in mind, which makes this makes the Dance of the Skywise quite good with prowess blue creatures from Fate Reforged. Now keep in mind, of course, that we only see a little bit of Fate Reforged and only very few creatures with prowess, but it's an interaction that's worth keeping in mind. Glint is mostly bad. You can play this as a defensive spell to give you protection from a removal spell or make your guy stay alive in combat, but it doesn't help you win combat in the sense that if your power isn't enough to kill the opposing creature, it won't be after casting this spell either. At 2 mana, this can be an important thing if you have bombs, if you have really strong creatures you need to keep alive. You want to include this, but this is not a trick that will help you win combat. It's simply a defensive one. Moving on to black. Black's got the goods in this set, and starting off with Butcher's Glee sets the tone for the sort of red-black type tricks. Target creature gets +3/+0 and gains lifelink. This already is a significant life swing. However, it gets better with we get regeneration, just like Boon of Erebos. But the additional 2 points of power, we have +3/+0 lifelink and regeneration, means that basically your creature will survive and win combat, but also have a 6-point life swing if it hits the player. For 3 mana, I think this is one of the best tricks in the set, and it can be a significant swing, especially if you're racing. Just getting 3 life, getting rid of the creature, and keeping you alive is a very strong play. Coat with Venom is competitively priced, if we say. It costs just 1 black, +1/+2 in Death Touch. Basically means your guy will definitely trade with any creature almost that it tassels with, but the added 2 toughness makes it likely that it even will stay alive. So this is one to be on the lookout for playing against the black opponent. It's easy to keep 1 black open, and this is a very potent trick to deal with. Flatten is Throttle's big brother, and just makes Throttle bad. At 5 mana, Throttle given -4/-4. We played it, but it was a clunky spell, never very good. At 4 mana, Flatten is a very effective removal spell. Kills smaller dragons, and most other creatures in the game. So this is one of the best removal cards at common, and something that you'll be happy to play. Deathwind, on the other hand, well, while it can get rid of smaller creatures for less than 4 mana, it's if you want to give -4/-4, it's basically Throttle. What it does do late in the game is that this is a card that allows you to take out the biggest creatures late in the game. It's also good to notice that sometimes just giving -1/-1 is enough to swing combat your way. So it's a flexible card. It's definitely a good card, but it's a bit pricey if you want to take out larger creatures. And Flatten is more mana efficient, but Deathwind obviously more flexible. This is it's important to remember that Flatten is a common, whereas Deathwind is uncommon. So the next card is Ultimate Price, which you remember from Return to Ravnica. It's 2 mana for destroy target monocolored creature. It is important to notice that aside from the Dragon Lords and the 2 colored dragons, most creatures in the set are monocolored. Most creatures in Fate Reforged are monocolored. However, do keep in mind that colorless creatures are not considered monocolored. So there's a limited field of this, but it kills most face-up creatures, and at 2 mana, that's about as efficient of a removal spell as we get these days. Ultimate Price is definitely a powerful card in this set. So, That brings us to red, which overall seems to be quite a weak color. Just by looking initially at the creatures and things, red does look like it lacks a bit of bite, but one thing that it doesn't like is an efficient removal spell. At 1 on a red, this is almost lightning strike, but it can only deal damage to creatures, unless you can reveal a dragon or control a dragon, in which case it becomes Searing Blaze with landfall activated, and dealing a total of 6 damage, 3 to a creature, 3 to a controller, which is very potent. But that does require you to have a dragon, and dragons tend to come down, the earliest dragons come down as a 5-drop. They're 5-drop, 6-drop things, so basically you'd have to have one in hand for that effect to come in. I'd say that does not happen very often. Despite the fact that this is a dragon set, dragons are not common. There are no dragons are common, and you simply just won't have dragons in hand that often, in my opinion. For that reason, this is just a decent removal spell, 3 damage to a creature. It's not Lightning Strike, and it's not Searing Blaze, and should not be considered as such. Next up for red is a simple combat winner, Kindled Fury for 1 red. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike. The first strike here is critical, obviously. So, simple trick, you just want to kill their dude, this lets you do it. So, mana efficient at 1, easy to hold open and easy to, something to be careful, mindful of when you're playing against a red opponent. Now, this is sort of the removal spell of note for red. Dealing 5 damage will kill most creatures in the set. Also worth noticing is that you can deal this to a player. So it's an instant lava axe, and dealing 2 damage to you is a small price to pay to dome someone for 5 or to get rid of their biggest creature at instant speed. 5 mana is a lot, but this is a spell that's definitely worth the mana cost. And I think that you'll see this card ending a lot of games or having a massive impact on a lot of games where it just simply shoot down your biggest threat. Tail Slash is decent. It obviously requires you to have a creature, but the good thing about Tail Slash is it doesn't fight. It simply says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target which you don't control. You can basically have one of your creatures bash another creature in the face. This obviously does have a bit of a setup cost. You need to have a creature, but already a creature with 3 or higher power will be able to take out a significant amount of other creatures. And casting this during combat, this can really screw up combat math. You can take out one of their blockers at no cost without taking any damage, and really turn combat in your favor. So Tail Slash can definitely be potent, and 3 mana isn't too much for the effect here. The next one is Twin Bolt, and with the amount of X1s, that is to say creatures with 1 toughness running around, especially when in white, this one is going to cause a lot of bitter tears. Since it's at common, it provides a quick and easy answer for opposing morphs, and every now and then there'll be a blowout where they take out 2 of your 1 toughness creatures. So be careful about playing 2 1 toughness creatures against a red opponent, because Twin Bolt at common means that you're going to see these around a lot, and this kind of flexible, cheap removal spell is something to constantly be aware of, constantly take into account when playing against a red. Finally, the updated Trumpet Blast. We have some guys surfing on lava to get +2/+0. All attacking creatures get +2/+0. The difference here is that they get Trample, and this Trample has increased the cost of this card from 3 mana to 5 mana, making it significantly harder to keep up and have mana for in a deck. And it seems like, while this still works well with a token-heavy deck, the Trample makes this much more an Tarkir card, where you want to have red and green big guys coming in. Never mind if they get blocked, because you'll smash through the defenses with Trample. So it plays a lot more like a mini overrun than it does Rush of Battle, and that should be considered. Still, something to be worried about when your opponent's board presence is dwarfing yours, but then again, if that happens, you should be worried anyway. Moving on to green. Green has as many trick instants as red do, but they of course focus more on bolstering and pumping, where red focuses on dealing damage. The first one is a significant bolster. 5 mana is a lot, but so is bolstering 4, turning effectively your 1/1 token into a 5/5. And keep it in mind the number of synergies that Dromoka colors, that's the white and green, has with counters. This can be a really powerful thing. Also, having only one guy, let's say you have a solitary flyer, bash with that, suddenly increasing your damage output by 4 can be quite a big game changer. So at 5 mana, however, it'll be relatively easy for an opponent to see what you're holding up. We have to remember also at 5 mana, the white removal spell that destroys a blocker or an attacker, and bolsters also there. There's quite a lot actually. The 5 mana slot is quite packed. Most colors have a significant removal or trick playable at 5 mana. And we have to also remember the morph rule, we shall come back to later, that the 5 mana is the thing to watch out for there. So you once your opponent hits 5 mana, passes the turn, you know something quite big is coming up, unless they're stuck on all lands. Inspiring Call is a bit interesting. It draws you a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it, and those creatures gain indestructible. Now, I hope you immediately thought, oh, because that's what I thought as well. And the reason I thought, oh, because the setup cost here is going to be challenging in many times. Yeah, ideally you have 3 creatures with +1/+1 counters on them, and you draw 3 cards for 3. That would be amazing. But then we have to think about what all do you have to go through, and how effectively can you, if you're playing a Dromoka deck, actually get those counters on your creatures. You need to have multiple creatures, and you need to somehow get counters on these multiple creatures. In those cases, this card gets good, but at least according to, in my opinion, that's quite a big of a setup cost to get. I think that you'd want to make sure first that you're able to bolster enough for this to be good, but I'm not sure if that is something that you can easily make happen. This will be easier to set up probably in a draft. I would assume that this card can get out of hand a little bit easier in draft. In sealed, you're not able to affect, you're not able to choose your card pool in the same way, so I'd say that this card is significantly worse in sealed and in the upcoming pre-release as well. A sideboard card in Pinion Feast destroys target creature with flying, bolsters 2, so obviously great in a way. I say great, but great at 5 mana is perhaps exaggerating. If they have a bomb at 5 that you need to have, okay, this is great. Regarding the bolster effect, keep in mind that you do need to be able to target this enable the caster. You cannot simply cast this as bolster 2 if there are no creatures with flying on the board. So make sure there's so this is why this is strictly a sideboard card, and even then at 5 mana, not the most impressive one. Press the Advantage, however, at 4 mana gives 2 of your creatures +2/+2 and trample, making this quite a neat finisher card, because you don't need very much. For a Tarkir colors, getting 2 relatively large creatures on board shouldn't be too difficult, and then making those press through the damage makes this a excellent finisher card. +2 toughness also means that even as a regular combat trick, this should be a card that could lead to many blowouts in the upcoming pre-release. Shape the Sands is then green's bad card. Basically, it allows you to use one of your ground pounders to take down a flyer when they don't expect it. But since it only gives 5 toughness and reach, it doesn't help the creature win combat on its own. It can save a creature against removal, and coming in at just 1 green is a very cheap card. But unless you have the rare that lets you assign damage based on your toughness instead of power, this card is mediocre, in my opinion. Tread Upon is then follows through on the sort of trample theme that we've seen in green pump spell this time. It's a basic +2/+2, but it also gives trample, so a very common kind of 2-mana trick. It's not spectacular. You'll probably want to play a couple of these, and you need to be mindful of the possibility of them having Tread Upon when playing against green. It's going to be one of the more common combat tricks that we'll see out of green, and every now and then it can be used as a finisher on a big creature to give it trample. So keep in mind that this exists at common. So I decided to have a separate entry altogether on counterspells. While these don't directly affect combat, this is something to one of the other things that you need to keep in mind when you play against blue and they pass with mana up. All in all, there are 7 counter spells in different forms and fashions, and 2 of them are rare. The cancel of the set, or the card that stops all spells, is one that many thought was going to be a reprinting of Force of Will, but it's contradict. It costs 5 mana, counters any spell, and it draws you a card. Now, drawing a card makes this actually a lot better, as it replaces itself. 5 mana is a lot, but sometimes this is just where the blue control deck finds itself, where it has multiple options. You might leave up 5 mana for any of the big removal spells, or you might leave up 5 mana to flip a Megamorph. So leaving up 5 mana is something that you find yourself doing a lot of times in this format. And so in that sense, the amount of mana is understandable. If we think about cancel at 3 mana, drawing a card for 2 more mana, makes this card not a good counterspell, but playable. So you should expect to see this. And it's especially good in Seal, where where most people have some kind of bombs and big expensive spells. Negate is then the model of efficiency. Any non-creature spell gets cancelled at 2 mana. Very decent, considering the amount of tricks and shenanigans in the set. But you're all familiar with Negate, I'm quite sure, so we'll carry on. This next one is a quite interesting thing. We have, in a way, we have Remove Soul, or Essence Scatter, on a stick, but it's not quite as simple as that. It has Flash, but the counter doesn't come in automatically. Instead, you have to use the Silumgar ability Exploit. So this means that the cost of this card really is 2 and 1 mana and one of your creatures, your worst creature. And so basically you're trading your worst creature for whichever card they're playing. You get a flying 2/1 out of the deal. So it's not entirely bad, but it does. You do need to keep in mind that this has a bit of a higher setup cost. Than you can cast this on an empty board, because one thing to keep in mind is you're able to have the creature exploit itself. So you're actually able to sacrifice Silumgar Sorcerer to its own exploit ability. So you can play this as a straight up 3 mana counter target creature spell, an effective creature counter, but a little bit complicated. The next is Double Blue, and functions as a Double Blue Spell Pierce, where basically you get to counter a target spell unless they pay 1. This can be useful in game 1 when they're not expecting it, perhaps, but this is going to be easier to play around later on. The clause against dragons that I mentioned earlier applies here as well. I said earlier about another card that had this dragon aspect to it, is that you won't necessarily have dragons that often. But if you do, this obviously becomes counterspell. So if you do have a dragon, you simply counter any spell for 2 blue. And that is counterspell, a spell so powerful that they don't print it anymore. But like I said, do not expect that to happen very often. The next one is one of the 2 rare counters. This one is also a triggered ability, but this one is activated by Megamorphing, your Stratus Dancer. The Megamorph cost is very low, so basically what you have here is Negate on a stick, and it leaves you with a 3/2 flyer. So this can be quite powerful as well, and quite easy to do. You play Morph, it's quite easy to keep 2 open for the Megamorph cost. Finally, one of the commands, I listed it here, even though it also can function as a trick in combat. Odutize command. It counters a creature spell and also allows you to either gain 4 life, draw a card, or return a creature card with mana cost 2 or less from your grave to the battlefield. So the first part there obviously could function as a combat trick, but the target creature spell is rarely played during combat, so this is rarely actually played as a combat trick. Most often you'll see this as a cantripping counter spell. Finally, there's another counter on a Megamorph. This one requires you to call up the classic 5. It then basically triggers a mana leak when you do this. So for 5 mana, you flip open Silumgar Spell Eater and you counter a target spell unless they pay 3. Any spell. This is quite powerful, but it requires 5 mana, and so it's one of these many things that reaches the magical 5 mana mark. Next I want to mention 2 cards specifically because they don't really fit into any other category. They're not really combat tricks in the same way. One kind of can function like it, but most of the time they function more as non-targeted removal and special tricks. But the first one is Odutize Breath. And this some people have said that this is one of the MVPs in the format, and I can definitely see that in an aggressive deck. It says tap target creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, so nothing crazy there, but it has rebound. So this, of course, in a sort of aggressive deck goes really well, because what you get to do is you at their end step you tap down one of their blockers, and at the beginning of your upkeep you can tap down another one for 2 turns and swing in with a lot of creatures. On defense, however, this does not function as well, because you only get to tap down 1 creature in combat, and then starting at the next upkeep you get to tap down another one. Never think of this as a tap 2 target creature spell. There's quite a long time between the 2 resolutions depending on when you cast this. But like I said, for in an aggressive thing where you want to get 2 creatures tapped down, and you can cast this at the end of the opponent's turn, will be very powerful. Otherwise, not so much. The other special mention I have is Foul Tongue Invocation, which basically is a Cruel Edict. You get them to sacrifice a creature, and of course the reason I didn't put this as a combat trick is because many times, of course, they can sacrifice a worthless creature who's not in combat or something like this. Many times, of course, it will affect combat, and doing this as an instant is removal, but it's not targeted in the sense that you don't have control over which one gets to be removed. So that's why I mentioned this separately. But at 3 mana, if they don't have so many creatures, it's effective. However, it has anti-synergy with the 2 enchantments that take creatures out of combat, Pacifism and the Reduce Stature spell. So if you've already enchanted one of the creatures with a Pacifism, they'll simply sacrifice that. So this is something to keep in mind with Foul Tongue Invocation. Finally, let's have a look at the rares. Secure the Wastes puts a 1/1 White Warrior token at for 1 and X, and it puts X tokens. This obviously can be quite a pain. You won't see it very much since it's a rare, but it is something to watch out for a little bit. The next one is a bit complicated. For 4 mana, they get to return a creature card from their graveyard to their hand. And this doesn't sound very great at all, but the good part comes where, based on the creature's toughness, you get -X/-X. Now, here we see some complications with this card. Usually, it is the creatures with the smallest amount of toughness that end up in the grave early on. So early on, you can only expect to get, -2, -1/-2, possibly -3 back with this. One thing that can change this, of course, is if you've had some of your big morphs creatures go to the graveyard early on, or if you've milled, if you manage to mill a bomb or something, then this can help. Later in the game, this becomes very good as you can get back your biggest, baddest creature and at the same time take out theirs. But it is worth paying attention or thinking about the fact that early on, the setup cost here means that you have to somehow first get a creature with a big butt into the graveyard before this turns into anything you want to play at all. Collected Company. When I first read this thing, I thought that it was an incredibly powerful card, and I'm sure it can get completely out of hand in Constructed. But at Limited, we'll have to look at this a little bit differently. You look at top 6 cards in your library, and you can put 2 creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. And if you manage to hit, then this is obviously incredibly powerful for 4 mana. The thing to make sure is that you are playing enough creatures with mana cost 3 or less. And keep in mind that the mana cost always looks at the top right corner of the card. You can't, for example, morph. You can't put morphs on the table with this card. It's simply the mana cost. But if you have a low enough curve, a lot of creatures at 3 or less, this can become quite good. It's obviously something that you have to play around a little bit with to figure out. Digging 6 cards down is pretty far. It's like a seventh, a little bit more than a seventh of your limited deck a lot of times. Well, if you think about it, you start with 33 cards in the deck. It actually becomes a bit more than a sixth of your deck. And hitting 3 cost creatures seems quite possible. at least you should hit one, and flashing out one guy for 4 mana is already okay. But this is a card that rewards good deck builders, because you really want to make sort of know what you have in your deck and what's left in your deck when you're casting the spell. If you play a Modo, this will be significantly easier, because before you cast the spell you can just bring up your deck in the collection screen and take a look at what's left and how likely you are to hit something. In paper, you need to be able to keep more in mind what kind of cards are left to hit in the deck. But yeah, a card with a lot of potential, but one that requires you to be able to read the game and know your deck, to know when it's the ideal time to cast it. You don't simply just slam this at the end of a turn 4, at the end of your opponent's step every time. But a card with massive potential and very interesting. It's probably going to make a lot of waves since it's constructed. Okay, next we're going to take a look at the 4 other commands. A Tarkir's command is one of the 2 cheapest ones. At 1 green and 1 red, the most important ones this can affect combat is that your creatures get +1/+1 and gain reach. Many times this will probably be used as 3 damage to the opponent as well, maybe as a finisher. But definitely the way this works as a combat trick most often is +1/+1 and reach. Not amazing, but then again the casting cost is also low, which reflects that. Dromoka's command is the other one, which has the similarly low green and white casting cost. I feel that this is much stronger as a combat trick, in that you get a permanent boost on one of your creatures and they fight. And in sense of power level, right out, Dromoka's command seems to be much more flexible in limited and does a lot what you want it to do. The sacrifice and enchantment clause can be very useful in a set with the sieges and pacifism. So all in all, I think Dromoka's command is a very strong trick that is useful in many different cases. Definitely better than a Tarkir's command. Colligan's command then is again has limited combat potential. Basically, what this does is it can shock a smaller creature in combat. This one is more situational in the other sense. Getting a player to discard the last card is a fine combination of value if you can manage to play that and shock. Returning a creature card from your to your hand, okay, again. As far as power level goes, I feel like this one shares the space there with the Tarkir's command, and Dromoka's command definitely is more flexible in a limited situation. With Sealamur's command, on the other hand, is the powerhouse of the commands, but it comes in as a hefty 5-drop or 5 mana spell, 3 blue and black. But the flexibility of this card is amazing. All of the modes are incredibly powerful. You can counter a non-creature spell. You can return a permanent, not just creature, any permanent to its owner's hand. A creature can get -3/-3. And finally, you can just flat out destroy a planeswalker. Now, the last one won't be in effect very often, but when it does, it'll be absolutely shattering. Taking out Ugin, taking out the new Sarkhan, or Narset's will be sweet. And then not only can you do that, but you can also take out one of the creatures, bounce one of the creatures. You can even use this as a way to counter them playing their planeswalker while taking out a creature. It is an incredibly powerful card, an incredibly flexible one, and one that I'm looking forward to playing if I can get lucky enough to get it. Of course, the drawback here is that it costs 5 mana, but at 5 mana, this is an effect that you're expecting. There's one more instant in rare that I want to bring up. It's Blessed Reincarnation, which is basically a polymorph of opponent's creatures. You cannot target your own creatures. You can exile one of their creatures, and they reveal cards until they reveal another creature, and they get to put that on. And then it gets rebound, which seems kind of weird. So in the following turn, you get to do this again. Now, this is going to be easier to play on turns on games 2 and 3 in a match when you know your opponent's deck a little bit. I mean, this is something you want to cast on their bomb to get rid of it. This is not a spell you want to use early on one of their smaller creatures unless you absolutely have to. So the good news is that you can the rebound is a May ability. So let's say that you cast it on their dragon and it turns into a rat. that means that the next upkeep you'll probably don't want to recast it at the risk of turning it right back into a dragon. So, but let's say that you cast it on a smaller dragon and turn it into a dragon lord. In that case, of course, you'll want to make use of the rebound the following upkeep and get rid of the second bomb as well. So, in that sense, you can see how it can be immensely powerful if you happen to get lucky enough to hit 2 of their bombs with this and exile them and then turn it into rat. But the variants might work differently as well. So it should be played accordingly. It's sort of a selective removal spell, which requires some skill to play optimally. Now then, I'll say a few things about a few of the instants I call sideboard hate cards, which is cards that you'll probably very rarely play main, but this set features some color hate cards where every color gets a card dedicated to hating on the enemy colors. The white one is Surge of Righteousness, which straight out destroys a black or red creature that's attacking or blocking, so that's an important thing to remember. You also gain 2 life. This is probably an auto include after sideboarding in I guess the red or black deck. Nothing strange to add about that one. Rending Volley is a similar one for run red in red, which deals 4 damage to a white or blue creature and it cannot be countered. The damage can, however, be prevented, so keep that in mind regarding this spell. The green one can destroy a black or blue non-creature permanent. I can already imagine that this will be played wrong a lot in paper. You cannot target a creature with this spell. And also keep in mind that lands are colorless, so you cannot destroy islands, you cannot destroy swamp with this spell. The other mode here is permanents you control can't be the target of blue or black spells, which is, you know, a defensive thing, technically giving hexproof against blue or black. But at 2 mana that's not very effective, and I'll see this only being brought in if the opponent is playing some powerful sieges or has a lot of auras and things in play that are tricky. But out of the 3 instant color hate cards, this one is the weakest. The black color hate card is a sorcery that makes you sacrifice a white and green creature, and so it's not included here in the instant list. And the blue hate card is an enchantment where you can enchant a red or green creature. They're not featured in this list as we're doing on an instance. Finally, I want to just say one thing about morph, which is an ability that you activate with instant speed, actually faster than instant because it doesn't use the stack. And the only thing I want to say about that is that the rule of 5 mana still holds. That is to say, if the opponent has 5 mana open, then their morph can turn into something that will survive if you block it with your morph. If they have less than 5 mana, you can safely block their morph with a 2/2, because whatever it turns into doesn't grant it more than 2 toughness. So this can be good to keep in mind. Overall, we see that the sort of rule of 5 mana has expanded into quite a lot of spells here. 5 mana is a threshold in this format where things are going to happen. Powerful removal spells are going to come online, and even with some really strong bomby creatures, you're not going to be safe if the opponent has 5 mana and cards in hand. Anyway, this was a review of the instance in Dragons of Tarkir. I hope you enjoyed the video and felt like you gained some knowledge about the set. I look forward to seeing you in Fantasia Pellet this Saturday and Sunday. Hope you do well in the pre-release. Thank you for watching and see you next week.